Période des questions, question period. Senator Housakos.
Government leader, as the Islamic Republic of Iran verges on collapse, Canadian security experts are sounding the alarm that regime officials, including members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, may soon attempt to flee and embed themselves in Canada, as others have done before. Despite a 2022 ban on senior Iranian officials entering the country, at least 20 have been identified as living here, with only one deported. Legal experts and Iranian-Canadian activists warn that our communities have become a haven for these actors, many of whom exploit asylum claims to remain here. With no foreign agent registry still in place, government leader, how can Canadians trust that your government is prepared to prevent foreign regime insiders from finding safe havens and safe harbor here in Canada?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question, Senator. This government, working with its allies, as most recently reflected in the meeting of the G7, are very focused on strengthening and enhancing our security in all respects, and that also includes those who may seek to arrive in Canada through different means.
Senator Housakos.
Senator Gould, tomorrow marks 1 year since Bill C-70 received royal assent. Yet the foreign agent registry still does not exist. It's not in place. This initiative was first introduced by former MP Kenny Chiu in 2021 and reintroduced right here after he lost his seat to foreign interference by yours truly. Since then, the government has made repeated promises but delivered no results. So tell us frankly, does the government truly take this threat seriously, or was C-70 merely a public relations exercise? We still have a serious problem.
The government does take the threats to our security seriously, and I certainly will raise these concerns with the minister if I have the opportunity, but my office certainly will follow it.
Senator Batters.
Senator Gold, Canada's ambassador to Russia, Sarah Taylor, recently tweeted commemorating the establishment of diplomatic relations with the USSR, Stalin's repressive totalitarian regime responsible for the deaths of millions in gulags and through mass starvation of the Holodomor. Among others, human rights activist Marcus Kolga objected to the Canadian ambassador's tweet saying, quote, "My grandfather was among thousands of Estonians imprisoned in the Soviet gulag, targeted for who they were and what they believed. Hundreds of thousands of others, Ukrainians, Poles, Latvians, Lithuanians, were swept up too. Many never came home," unquote. Senator Gold, Russia's current murderous dictator, Putin, has sustained his brutal invasion of Ukraine for 3 years. The killing and crushing misery continues daily. Putin has stated his intentions to reclaim Ukraine and other now sovereign territories into a new unified USSR. So why on earth is Canada's ambassador celebrating this?
Senator Gold.
This government and previous governments have been strong and unwavering in their support for the Ukraine in the face of the unjustified war of aggression raised by Russia. This particular current government demonstrated that clearly by his invitation to Prime Minister Zelensky to the G7, and more equally, if not more importantly, with the strong sanctions that this government has introduced against over 3,000 individuals and entities, including Mr. Putin himself, his inner circle, Russian banks, and members of his Russian Security Council and nuclear sector.
Senator Batters.
Exactly. This chamber has also passed motions decrying Putin's Russian invasion. Senators have given impassioned speeches supporting Ukraine and her fight for freedom. If freedom and democracy are truly integral to Canadian foreign policy, our taxpayer-funded ambassador should not signal support for a regime who killed millions of people. Given Putin's bloodthirsty tyranny, it's increasingly difficult to justify even having our ambassador in Russia. Could she at least refrain from implying Canada might support this Russian madman's imperial ambitions?
Senator Gold.
There is no question about where Canada stands in relation to the current government and its actions in Russia, and there is no equivocation from this government in its ongoing support for Ukraine and those suffering under actual or threats of aggression from Russia.
Senator Karatek Lindell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Gould, I want to highlight the chronic underfunding of the non-insured health benefits, or NIHB, under Indigenous Services Canada. This federal program provides vital services to Inuit, including dental and vision care, medical supplies, prescription drugs, mental health counseling, and medical travel. Nunavut, made up of 25 fly-in only communities, faces some of the highest healthcare costs in the country, averaging $27,000 per person. This is 3 times the national average. We also face elevated health rates due to systemic inequities, including a housing crisis and food insecurity. Over the past 11 years, the government of Nunavut has subsidized $419 million in non-insured health benefits, medical costs due to insufficient federal support. The Minister of Health has emphasized Nunavut cannot continue. What concrete steps is the government of Canada taking to close this?
Senator Kerr, thank you. Senator Gould?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for underlining this amongst too many other gaps in services provided to Nunavut citizens, residents, and indeed the North. And thank you also for joining us in the Senate. Your voice and your experience as a parliamentarian representing your communities, and especially uniquely the smaller communities outside of Iqaluit, will be a really important addition to our learning and our understanding. And I certainly will raise this, as I know you will, and encourage you to, with the relevant minister at every opportunity.
Senator Karatek-Landau?
Thank you. Building on that, the Inuit Child First Initiative supports access to healthy foods and other services that improve our health outcomes. Given that ICFI has an end date, how is Government of Canada ensuring that its approach to non-insured health benefits does not further contribute to the already magnified social inequities faced by our communities?
Senator Gould?
I'm not in a position to comment on plans beyond the timeline to which you referred, but I'll certainly add that to my remarks and to my interventions on behalf of with the minister.
Senator Greenwood?
My question is for Senator Gould. June 21st, 2025 marks National Indigenous Peoples Day. It is a time where we recognize and celebrate the traditions, cultures, contributions, and rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. But recent events are overshadowing this important day. Rights holders are speaking out on Bill C-5. Such an unprecedented bill that gives Cabinet extraordinary powers is being expedited through Parliament. Lack of consultation is putting the honor of the Crown at stake. Rights holders shared with parliamentarians that Bill C-5 has the potential to trample their rights and is inconsistent with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. While the previous administration was far from perfect, the nation-to-nation relationship was moving forward. Many are worried that we have witnessed the high water mark of reconciliation, and those waters are now receding. Senator Gould, will reconciliation withstand the consequences?
Thank you, Senator Gould. Thank you, Senator. Senator Gould.
Thank you for your question. Let us be clear, Senators. I understand the concerns that have been raised. I've heard them directly, as we all have. As a matter of constitutional law, the recognized, affirmed, historic rights, treaty rights of Indigenous peoples are protected by the Constitution, recognized and affirmed, and cannot be affected and are not affected by Bill C-5. The government acknowledges that consultations with and partnership with Indigenous leadership and rights holders is integral. Indeed, the Prime Minister has just said that the government intent in Bill C-5 is to totally embrace the notion and concept of free and informed consent. That obligation on the Government of Canada exists, both is acknowledged within the bill, but exists independently of the bill. No government can and this government will not deviate from that important and historic obligation.
Senator Greenwood.
Thank you for your response. Will the government accept amendments that will protect the rights of Indigenous peoples?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question. Under breaking news, many senators may not realize that a series of amendments were passed most recently by the House, so that the bill that we expect to receive will contain many such amendments, some of which do address the issues raised by First Nations.
Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Gold, the replacement of Canada's submarine fleet is underway. These submarines will bolster Canada's ability to deter an assertive China, protect Arctic sovereignty, and support NATO maritime defense. The projected cost of procuring up to 12 submarines with advanced capabilities, including stealth, lethality, and Arctic deployability, will be around $60 billion over their life cycle. Production timelines are incredibly long for these inner space craft before Canada will see a submarine come into service. And never forget that an assertive and aggressive nation has a vote in our timelines. Senator Gold, are you able to provide an update on the status of the submarine procurement process? And if not, could you please ask the Minister for a written response?
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question. I'm not in a position to provide a timeline, and I certainly will make inquiries. But it does give me the opportunity to remind those watching us, and of course those in the chamber, of the historic investment that this government is making to our national defense. It will be an ongoing, continuing commitment to make sure that we have the resources, whether material resources such as submarines and other technologies, and the human resources to make sure that we are protected and that our sovereignty is protected for the benefit of all citizens and generations to come.
Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Senator Gold. I look forward to the written response. Any procurement of this cost and duration needs to be able to last over successive government cycles. There's been talk of the Defense Industrial Strategy, and I will continue to bring this question up. I'm wondering if you could please inquire when we can expect to see this strategy hit the streets.
Senator Gold.
Thank you. As I said in response to it, I shall certainly make inquiries with regard to your first question, and I will certainly add that further matter to the inquiries I'll make with the Minister.
Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the government representative. News Media Canada is calling for the federal government to spend at least 25% of its advertising budget on traditional Canadian media. It appears that of the $86 million spent by the government in advertising last year, only 1% was spent on Canadian newspapers. There are at least 3 reasons to spend more in Canada. First, buy Canadian, build a strong Canadian news media sector and build a strong economy. Second, support Canadian media rather than the American-owned media. Third, support avenues for less disinformation coming from abroad. This is one way to financially support strengthening news media in Canada without an increased cost to the Treasury. So my question is, could the government review its advertising program and make sure we spend the majority, that is over 50%, News Media Canada is suggesting 25, I'm suggesting the majority of its advertising dollars in Canada on Canadian news media.
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question and for your continued advocacy in this important area. I certainly will communicate your recommendations to the government, as well as those to which you made reference. This government is focusing and will continue to focus on serving Canadians, and that includes making sure that Canadians have access in all respects to a credible and variety of sources of information. And I certainly will communicate your questions and your concerns to the government.
Senator Cardozo?
Thank you for that, Senator Gold. A lot of the precise information on spending is hard to get a hold of. Could you please ask the minister responsible for the Advertising Services Directorate, who's the Minister of PSPC, to provide figures in detail about how much has been spent in recent years and how much is planned for the next year, for this year and the next year, and with a breakdown on Canadian and foreign media for print, broadcast, and online media?
Senator Gold?
I will certainly add that to my inquiry.
Senator Martin?
Leader, in 2024, according to estimates, Canada issued roughly 88,000 temporary permits per month. But so far in 2025, that number has almost doubled, surging to over 171,000 monthly. Between January and April alone, Canada recorded 817,000 new arrivals, including 491,400 work permits and 194,000 study permits. These are staggering numbers by any standard, and they raise serious questions about oversight and planning. So, Leader, how did your government lose control of immigration so badly in just 1 year? And is this yet another example of saying one thing publicly while allowing the system to accelerate unchecked behind the scenes?
Senator Gold?
Senator, thank you for your question. This government, this government is focused on finding the right balance between the needs to Canada of attracting what the human resources we need for our economy and for the growth of our society, with ensuring that we have the ability to integrate and to support those who choose to come here for the benefit of us collectively, and it will continue to do so. The government in the past has taken steps to readjust levels of immigration, while all the same time, as we've heard in this chamber even recently, to make sure that Canada attracts the immigrants it needs for its economic growth and prosperity.
Senator Martin?
Yes, the throne speech promised balance, yet temporary immigration is accelerating and further straining housing and social services. With over 800,000 newcomers in 4 months, how can Canadians trust this government to enforce its promised cap? Will we see real enforceable plan this year? And is this just another case, or is this just another case of words without action?
Senator Gold?
I think Canadians have demonstrated their trust in this government, both in terms of the actual results of the election and in terms of the results of polls that have given this current Prime Minister an extraordinary high level of popular support. But as I've said here, and here I'm echoing the words of the Prime Minister, this government will be judged by its results, and Canadians should have confidence that it will work hard to deserve that trust.
Senator Martin?
Yes, continuing on. In Toronto, a mother of 2 young children was killed by a stray bullet during a shootout between drug dealers near a supervised injection site. An employee of that center then helped one of the suspects escape by concealing evidence and arranging his departure. She pleaded guilty, yet she will not spend a single day in prison. Can the Liberal government tell us if this is now the norm in Canada, that someone who knowingly helped the killer of a mother of 2 children avoid justice and doesn't spend even 1 day in prison?
Shame. Shame.
Senator Gold?
This is a tragic story that we read with great alarm. The tragedy of the deaths, and Senator, I'm going to content myself with saying and reminding us and asking us not to instrumentalize a tragedy such as this in disregard of the actual facts and constitutional responsibilities that are shared and roles that are shared by police, by prosecutors, and by our judiciary. So this is not an example of to This is a tragic story. I don't know, and we don't know the circumstances in that moment of crisis of what motivated the woman to whom you referred. Can we join together in mourning the tragedy of the loss of life and respect
Senator
institutional division?
Martin.
It is a tragic example, but it is shocking because, Leader, this offender will be allowed to go to work daily at Good Life Fitness while 2 children are left without their mother for the rest of their lives. Will the Liberal government apologize to the victim's family for enabling a justice system that seems more concerned with the comfort of criminals than with the memory of victims and public safety?
Senator Gold.
Senator, the government is not going to apologize for a tragedy that it has no responsibility, but it grieves along all of us with the loss of life in this tragedy. And I implore us to stay focused on our responsibilities, to be factual and constitutionally appropriate where we attribute responsibility.
Senator Pate.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Senator Gold, as we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day this weekend, a few of the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls for justice of the MMIWG National Inquiry have been realized. The government has committed to act and implement each of these calls. The MMIW National Inquiry recognized that the same issues that give rise to Indigenous women being disproportionately victimized, disappeared, murdered, and on the streets are the same issues that result in them being the fastest growing prison population, such that they are now 1 in 2 of the women in federal penitentiaries. What is the government's plan to decarcerate the over 300 Indigenous women currently in federal penitentiaries in order to meet its commitment to TRC call number 30 to eliminate the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples in prisons by the end of this year?
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question and for your continued advocacy on this issue before and during your time in the Senate. The overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system and women in particular is a serious and complex issue. It's rooted in systemic racism and our unfortunate legacy. That is why the government has introduced the Indigenous Justice Strategy, which lays out a vision and priority areas for work going forward in Canada, working with Indigenous peoples, with the provinces and with the territories to ensure positive and lasting change in our Canadian justice system. I cannot commit to a timetable, but this government remains committed to that important work going forward.
Senator Pate.
Thank you for that, Senator Gold. But since the inception of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act in 1992 and reinforced by subsequent reports, commissions of inquiry, investigations, advisory committees, and correctional investigator reports, all of which has been mentioned previously and have existed for more than 33 years, there still hasn't been action. So what concrete steps are being taken beyond that strategy to ensure immediate rollout and proper funding of the community-based Indigenous-led initiatives that must be fully in place this year?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you. The steps that the government is taking is to continue to work with Indigenous peoples and communities and the other stakeholders in the system to make progress on this very important and pressing social matter.
Senator Osler.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Senator Gold, there's a growing momentum across Canada to remove interprovincial barriers to labour mobility, most recently through the One Canadian Economy legislation, which proposes mutual recognition of provincial and territorial certifications to enable workers to move between jurisdictions more easily. Yet today, physicians still face a different licensing requirement across provinces and territories, limiting their ability to go to work in response to areas of urgent need, especially in rural, remote, and underserved communities. Given that the federal government is advancing labour mobility and removing regulatory obstacles, when will the government commit to implementing a framework for pan-Canadian licensure for physicians?
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question. Look, it's important that our healthcare system change to better serve Canadians. That means that all levels of government and healthcare partners must work together to do what is needed. We know, as you know and mentioned, that the licensing of physicians falls under provincial jurisdiction, that the Government of Canada remains committed to working with provinces and territories to reduce as many barriers as possible. Some provinces have already taken action amongst themselves to reduce these types of barriers. We heard yesterday from former Minister Lisa Raitt about how, and others, if I recall, that in some sense the federal government is taking its lead in some of these areas from the provinces, and I applaud the work that the provinces is doing in those areas of jurisdiction.
Senator Osler.
Thank you, Senator Gold. And this is an area, as Senator Seidman had spoke about, federal leadership would be extremely helpful. But as we work to improve labor mobility within Canada, we have to address the systemic barriers facing the internationally trained physicians and nurses who want to work in our healthcare system. And improving labor mobility should include efficient access for those with international credentials who are already in Canada. So what concrete steps will the government take to reduce these barriers and support internationally trained physicians and nurses to get their credentials recognized?
Senator Gold.
Well, the government is aware of this challenge. We all are as citizens. The government has invested, I believe it's in the order of $200 billion in discrete relationships and in direct health funding to provinces to help the provinces transform their healthcare system. And each of those arrangements have specifics tailored to the needs of the provinces and the priorities of the government. And we're hoping that this will help the provinces accelerate their process.
Senator Husakos.
Government leader, the last labor force survey has come out in Canada, and we're in the grips of an unemployment crisis. The national unemployment rate has gone above 7%, the highest since 2016, exception being COVID. That's the third consecutive monthly increase. Particularly alarming is the spike in youth unemployment. Over 1 in 5 returning students are jobless, the highest rate since 1999 outside of the pandemic.
Wow.
The crisis is real, and it's touching young people. And we can't afford to just say to them, we're looking into it, or try to attach this to some veiled legislation that is disconnected from reality. So we have to realize that struggling students, young workers who face this rising costs and vanishing opportunities need the government to act now.
Senator Gold.
This government is acting now. We heard it in the committee of the whole. This government is very aware of the impact of current economic circumstances on our economy. Part of it is, to be blunt, and we know this, the tariffs, unjustified and illegal tariffs. The disruption of the world economy caused by a change of direction to the most powerful economy and most powerful country in the world. That's why this government is seizing the moment. That's why we will soon be seized with Bill C-5. That's why people like Lisa Raitt, former Premier Gallant, and others have encouraged us and encouraged all Canadians to take the bold steps forward so that we can build the prosperity that we need, that we can build the resilience that we need, not only in the short term, and indeed, it's immediately necessary to provide relief, but what's equally and more important is that we build for the future of these young people who are facing these challenging times.
Senator Husakos.
Senator Gold, food prices have now outpaced inflation in 3 straight months. Essentials like milk, eggs, and bread are still up nearly 4% from last year. At the same time, food banks have hit record levels, even among working families and students, and over 8 million Canadians, including 2.1 million children, face food insecurity. Senator Gold, to now refer to C4 and C5 and initiatives that I have stood on this floor for almost a decade asking the government to implement, now all of a sudden are being implemented but are going to get into the force.
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your advocacy and for reminding this chamber of privileged senators, that we need reminding of the difficult challenges that our fellow citizens are facing. This government is acting with all speed, unprecedented speed, to address the affordability issues and the economic issues that we need in Canada to prosper.
Senator Housakos. Senator Martin.
Yes, Leader, for 2 years in a row now, the Auditor General has released scathing reports detailing rampant non-compliance with procurement rules and repeated failures to demonstrate value for money. Yet the government has astonishingly increased its professional services budget this year by over $7 billion, or 37% according to this year's main estimates. How does the government justify such a dramatic surge in spending on external consultants while procurement oversight remains demonstrably broken?
Good question. Senator Gold.
The government is not only seized with, but accepts the recommendations of the Auditor General in the criticism that she leveled against the procurement policies. The government is focused, each minister has been focused by the Prime Minister through the mandate letter delivered to each minister to provide direction or feedback to the government as to how those ministries, including procurement, will deliver on the promise, and the Minister of Minister Solomon and all other ministers are going to be focused on using the tools available to us technologically, human resources, and the like to make the much needed improvements in our procurement process. If we don't do that, then the investments that we make, whether in defense or in our economy, will be for naught. This government is going to focus on the results it needs, is determined to get it right.
Senator Martin.
Leader, it's a lot of money, $7 billion of taxpayer money, which is the increase. So what specific actions is the government taking to reduce its dependency on consultants? And when will Canadians see those actions reflected in actual reductions in spending?
Senator Gold.
There is thank you for your question. I do not have the specific answer, except to remind us that there is an almost obvious mathematical relationship between the number of employees in the public service and those outside resources that may be needed to address specific issues. This government and this Prime Minister is focused on economic growth and on efficiency in government, and is determined to deliver on those promises.
The time for question period is now expired.